This Christmas my daughter-in-law called, her voice dripping with apology. "Things are really tight for us this year, Mom," she said. "So why don't you just stay home and get some rest? It'll be good for you." And I believed her. I did, right up until I stumbled upon a picture of their whole family checking in at the airport for a trip to Hawaii. I was all set to book a trip of my own. You know, to chase after my own freedom. But in the end, I took the entire $50,000 my husband and I had saved over a lifetime, and I gave it all away. When the local news started reporting on the mysterious benefactor who had saved Christmas for the entire town, my son's phone blew up. But the question he screamed at me wasn't, "Mom, where are you?" It was, "What did you do with Dad's money?" My name is Susan Peterson. I'm 66 years old, and I live alone in a small, snow-covered town in Minnesota. This story, well, it's going to change the way you think about betrayal, about selflessness, and about what it really means to be rich. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. The snow had started to fall in Minnesota. It wasn't the fierce, howling blizzard of January, but the gentle, unhurried first snowflakes of the season, as if the whole sky were slowly letting down a soft white veil. From my living room window, I could watch them swirl in the yellow glow of the streetlight, landing silently on the bare tree branches and dusting the tired, brown lawn with a delicate powder. Our house, the nest that George and I had spent our whole lives building, was sunk in an almost absolute quiet. A quiet broken only by the steady tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the corner and the cheerful crackle of the fire in the hearth. It's been 5 years now. 5 years since George left me, but it feels like every corner of this place still holds the warmth of him. I was sitting in his familiar leather armchair, the one that had grown worn over the years, molded to the shape of the man I loved. In my hands, I held a steaming mug of ginger tea, the spicy aroma rising with the steam, trying its best to chase away the chill that crept in through every crack. But there was another kind of cold, an invisible one that radiated from deep inside my chest, that no fire or hot tea could ever warm. It was the cold of emptiness. Christmas was just around the corner, and for me, this time of year was always a fierce tug of war between the joy of memory and the sorrow of the present. Before, this was when the house was at its liveliest, filled with Kevin's laughter, the chatter of the grandchildren, and George's deep, warm chuckle echoing through the rooms. Now, it was just me and the memories. Next to the fireplace, the Christmas tree I'd put up just yesterday stood tall, smelling of fresh, clean pine. I'd spent the whole afternoon decorating it, carefully hanging each ornament we had collected over 40 years together. There was the lopsided papier-mâché star Kevin made in the first grade, smeared with paint but priceless to me. There was the glass orb with a little skating couple inside, the gift George gave me our first Christmas as a married couple when we were so poor we could only afford one gift between the two of us. Every single ornament was a chapter in a book, and this whole tree was a chronicle of our love. But a book with no one to read it with is a lonely thing indeed. I set my tea down on the little end table and reached for the thick, velvet-covered photo album, its red fabric faded with time. The pages themselves felt heavy with the years. I turned them slowly, my fingers gently tracing over the yellowed photographs. There was my George, in his navy uniform, his smile young and a little naive. On our wedding day, his eyes sparkling with pure joy as he looked at me, holding our son, Kevin, in his arms, clumsy but so full of love. And then, the last picture we ever took together, on a camping trip at Lake Superior. His hair had turned to silver, the lines around his eyes were deeper, but that smile was just as radiant and warm as ever. I raised my hand, gently touching his face in the photo, as if doing so could let me feel his sun-weathered skin, could let me hear his laugh one more time. His voice still seemed to echo in my ears. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, years ago, when we were still dreaming of a leisurely retirement. George had spread a giant world map out on the living room floor. He was sprawled out on it, as excited as a little boy, and I was sitting beside him, my chin resting on his shoulder. "Look here, Susan," he'd said, his calloused finger gliding across the map. "When we retire, I want to take you here. Provence, France. We'll walk through the purple lavender fields in July. His finger moved. And here, too. New Orleans. We'll listen to live jazz in those little clubs in the French Quarter. You'd love it. I had chuckled. George, how on earth will we ever have enough money for all of that? He turned to look at me, his blue eyes shining with a steady faith. We'll manage. I started a savings account. I'm calling it our Dream Fund. Every month, we'll put a little something in. Not much, but we'll be steady. It's like building a bridge, Susan. One brick at a time, and then one day, it'll take us anywhere we want to go. He wrapped his arms around me, his voice dropping to a whisper in my ear. This world is our book, Susan, and we're not going to just read the first page. And so we did. For years and years, our Dream Fund grew. It became the symbol of our future, a promise of the adventures that were waiting for us. But then, life took a sharp, unexpected turn. George's illness came on so fast, it didn't give us a fighting chance. The bridge we had built together was finished, but I was the only one left standing on this side. I sighed, closing the heavy album. Grief is like the tide. Sometimes it recedes, leaving a peaceful shore, but other times it surges in with a powerful wave, drowning everything. I stood up and walked over to the oak desk in the corner. I opened the top drawer, sifting past old pens and paid bills, and pulled out a dark blue leather-bound passbook, its corners frayed. On the cover, George's handwriting was still clear. Our Dream Fund. I opened it. The final number, updated a few months ago, was still there. $50,000. $50,000. It wasn't a small sum. It was the fruit of decades of scrimping and saving. It sat there, silent and cold, like a monument to our unfinished plans. After George passed, I hadn't touched a single penny. Kevin had suggested, more than once, that I use it to fix up the house or buy a new car. But I couldn't. To me, it wasn't just money. It was the lavender fields I hadn't seen, the jazz melodies I hadn't heard, the trains that never left the station. It was what was left of George. I put the passbook back in the drawer, the sound of wood against wood, seeming hollow in the silence. I told myself I had to cheer up. Christmas is for family. Kevin, Jessica, and my 2 grandkids, Lily and Noah, were supposed to be coming. The house would be filled with laughter again. I'd bake my famous pumpkin pie, the one Kevin always loved. I'd prepare the carefully wrapped presents and place them under the tree. I'd get to see the sparkle in the kids' eyes as they ripped open the paper. Yes, it was going to be a warm Christmas. I just had to believe it. I went into the kitchen and started making a list of everything I needed for the feast. Turkey, potatoes, cranberry sauce, all the ingredients for the pumpkin pie. My hand glided across the paper, and my mind started to fill with plans. I pictured the whole family gathered around the dining table, the candlelight flickering, the clinking of silverware mixing with the happy buzz of conversation. I smiled to myself. Maybe happiness doesn't disappear completely, it just changes form, and this Christmas I was going to grab hold of it. I would turn this house into a warm haven, a peaceful sanctuary for the people I loved. At least, that's what I was hoping for. The next few days passed in a quiet sort of excitement. The sadness seemed to have temporarily retreated, making way for eager anticipation. I turned my loneliness into action. I woke up early each morning, planning every little detail for the upcoming Christmas day. The house, which was already clean, was now scrubbed and polished until I could practically see my reflection in the hardwood floors. I changed the curtains, washed the woolen rugs, and rearranged every book on the shelves. I wanted everything to be perfect, as if to prove that even though I was alone, I could still keep the soul of this family alive. I spent an entire day shopping. Not the rushed, hectic shopping you do at a crowded mall, but a leisurely stroll through the small shops in town. I picked out the biggest, plumpest turkey from the familiar butcher shop, where Mr. Miller smiled and wished me a happy holiday. I bought the freshest vegetables from the farmer's market, golden potatoes, and plump, ruby-red cranberries. I even found the exact brand of cinnamon and nutmeg my mother used to use for her pumpkin pie, spices with a rich aroma that could awaken a whole world of memories. When I got home, my small kitchen was overflowing with fresh ingredients, promising a magnificent feast. But my greatest joy was preparing the gifts. I didn't buy expensive, flashy things. My gifts always had a personal touch. For Lily, my 10-year-old bookworm granddaughter, I found a special signed edition from her favorite author. For Noah, my rambunctious 8-year-old grandson, I hand-knitted a blue sweater with a goofy-looking T-Rex on the front. I had to unravel and re-knit it a few times to get it just right. And for Kevin and Jessica, I chose a digital photo frame and I carefully loaded it with hundreds of family photos from years past, a journey through memory they could watch anytime. As I wrapped each gift, I imagined the joy and surprise on their faces. These weren't just material things, they were my love, carefully packaged in colored paper and ribbon. That afternoon, while I was humming an old Christmas tune and starting the dough for my first batch of gingerbread cookies, my phone rang. The screen lit up with Jessica's name. My heart gave a little flutter of joy. Maybe she was calling to see if I needed any help, or to confirm what time they'd be arriving on Christmas Eve. I quickly wiped my hands on my apron, swiped the screen to answer, my voice filled with excitement. "Hello, Jessica, my dear, Mom's here." "Hi, Susan." Jessica's voice came through the line, but something was off. It lacked its usual warmth. It sounded strained, and I could hear a faint, tinny music in the background, like the noise of a busy shopping center, not the quiet of a home. "Are you out somewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "Yeah, just picking up a few last-minute things," Jessica answered quickly. Then she hesitated for a moment, as if she were searching for the right words. "Listen, Mom, I'm calling to tell you that." Well, that hesitation sent a little prickle of unease through me. "Finances are a little tight this year," she continued, her voice flat, almost robotic. "We're probably just going to have a small, very small Christmas at home. You know, Kevin's work hasn't been going too well lately. So, you should just stay home and get some rest, okay? We'll send your gifts over later." Every single word she spoke was like a shard of ice to the chest. The warm, fragrant kitchen suddenly felt cold and stark. I looked down at the table, at the cookie dough I was about to roll out, at the beautifully wrapped gifts sitting on the dining table. Tight? A very small Christmas? I hadn't asked for anything fancy. All I wanted was their presence. "Oh," was all I could manage to say. My throat felt tight. I tried to think of something to say, something to hold on to, but my mind was completely blank. "We're really sorry, Mom," Jessica added, but her apology sounded hollow, like a line read from a script. "We'll come visit right after the holidays. You take care of yourself." "All right, dear," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I didn't have the strength to argue. "Don't you worry about me. I understand. You just take care of your little family." The call ended. I just stood there, motionless, the phone still pressed to my ear even though the other end was just a dead, soulless dial tone. A silence enveloped me, a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than the quiet of an empty house. It was the silence of rejection. I slowly lowered the phone. My hands were trembling. I looked around the kitchen, which just minutes ago had been a symbol of my hope. Now everything seemed to be mocking me. The turkey in the fridge, the fresh vegetables, the gifts wrapped with all my heart, it all felt utterly meaningless. A single hot tear rolled down my cheek, and then another. I didn't sob, I just stood there, letting the tears fall in silence. They weren't tears of anger, but of a deep, profound hurt. The feeling of being left behind, of being seen as a burden, an inconvenience in the lives of the very children I had spent my life loving. I walked slowly to the dining table, where the menu I had planned was still lying. My hand slowly crumpled it up, the paper ball in my palm feeling just like my heart did in that moment. I had prepared a feast for a family, but now I realized I was just a guest who wasn't invited to their own life. I didn't eat dinner that night. I wasn't hungry anymore. I just sat in George's armchair, staring at the twinkling lights on the Christmas tree. The blinking lights, which were supposed to be cheerful and warm, now looked like cold, distant sparks. I felt so foolish. Foolish for hoping, foolish for trying, foolish for thinking that my existence still mattered to them. Jessica's lie echoed in my head. Finances are a little tight. I knew Kevin was a good son, but he also doted on his wife. Jessica had probably convinced him that a trip somewhere would be better than a traditional Christmas. I didn't blame Kevin, I just felt sorry for him, caught between his mother and his wife. But that sympathy couldn't soothe my own pain. That night, I dreamt of George. We were walking hand in hand on a sunny beach. He turned to me, smiled, and said, "Don't you worry, Susan. Sometimes, when one door closes, it's so a much bigger one can open." I woke up before dawn, my pillow still damp with tears. George's words in the dream were probably just my subconscious trying to comfort me, but they had planted a tiny, resilient seed in my heart. The days following Jessica's call passed in a blur, like a thick fog had rolled in. I moved through my own home like a ghost, going through the motions of daily life mechanically, without any feeling. I'd make coffee in the morning but forget to drink it, leaving it to grow cold on the counter. I'd make the bed, smoothing out wrinkles that weren't there. I'd bring in the mail, only to let it pile up on the hall table, unopened. Time seemed to have lost its meaning, becoming just a string of empty moments. The Christmas tree in the living room, with its blinking lights, was now a cruel reminder of a joy that had been stolen. I couldn't bring myself to look at it anymore. Instead, I spent most of my time in my bedroom, with the curtains drawn to shut out the daylight and the curious eyes of my neighbors. I didn't want anyone to see me like this. I didn't want the sympathetic inquiries, the questions about my family's Christmas plans. Pity, sometimes, hurts more than indifference. I tried to read, but the words just danced meaninglessly before my eyes. I turned on the television, but the Christmas movies, with their happy family reunions and joyous laughter, only rubbed salt in the wound. Everything around me seemed to be shouting about a happiness that I was no longer a part of. My biggest torment wasn't anger, but a question that relentlessly gnawed at my mind. Why? Why did Jessica have to lie? If they were truly having financial trouble, I would have been the first person to help. I had my savings, my pension. I would have shared everything I had without a second thought. Had my presence become such a burden that they had to invent a clumsy lie just to get rid of me? Had I done something wrong? Was I too overbearing with Kevin? Or was I not sensitive enough to keep a respectful distance from my son's family? 1,000 questions of self-doubt tore me apart, making me feel small and like a failure. On the third night after that fateful call, I couldn't sleep a wink. The silence of the house was terrifying. It amplified the ticking of the clock, turning it into hammer blows against my frayed nerves. Around 2 in the morning, unable to bear it any longer, I got out of bed, threw on a robe, and went down to the kitchen to make a glass of warm milk, a childhood remedy for sleepless nights. While I waited for the milk to warm, I sat at the kitchen table and mindlessly picked up my phone. Maybe I just meant to check the time, or scroll through the news to distract myself. But then, out of habit, my thumb swiped over to the social media icon. I opened the app, the screen glowing with bright, curated images from other people's lives. Office parties, romantic dates, happy family portraits. I scrolled listlessly until a familiar name caught my eye. It was a post from one of Jessica's friends, a woman named Brenda whom I'd met a few times at family gatherings. Brenda's post was a public photo album. The caption was bubbly. "So wonderful to see Kevin and Jessica's family off at the airport for their dream trip to Hawaii. Have a sunny Christmas, you guys, so jealous." My heart stopped. Beneath the caption was a series of photos. The first one, painfully clear, showed Kevin and Jessica's entire family standing at the departure gate. Jessica was wearing a vibrant maxi dress and designer sunglasses, beaming as she held Kevin's arm. Kevin was smiling, a wide, genuine smile I hadn't seen in a long time. My grandkids, Lily and Noah, were excitedly waving at the camera, each pulling a small, colorful suitcase. Behind them, a digital sign clearly displayed, Flight 247 to Honolulu, Hawaii. My hand trembled, and the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. I zoomed in on the picture, staring at each face, each detail. There was no mistaking it. The lie about being tight on finances, about a very small Christmas, shattered into a million pieces, leaving behind a reality so stark and painful it took my breath away. They weren't struggling. They were on a lavish vacation. They hadn't just made other plans. They had deliberately deceived me, concocting a sob story to gently push me out of their lives. The initial shock quickly gave way to an icy chill that ran down my spine. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was betrayal. A betrayal from the very people I loved most in this world. I scrolled through the other photos. Jessica hugging Brenda, laughing. Kevin helping Noah put his suitcase on the conveyor belt. Everything radiated joy and excitement, without a single trace of guilt or remorse. I felt like an outsider looking through a window at a warm, cozy party to which I would never be invited. I turned off my phone, its dark screen reflecting my own stunned face. The milk on the stove had started to boil over, the smell of burnt milk filling the kitchen, but I didn't even notice. I just sat there, in the cold, dark kitchen, and for the first time since George died, I felt truly, completely alone in this world. The feeling of being excluded, of being made invisible, was worse than any angry word or argument, because it implies that you simply don't matter, that your presence or absence makes no difference at all. I had spent my entire life building a family, loving and caring for them. And what was my reward? To be lied to so they could enjoy a vacation without the inconvenience of an old mother. Tears started to fall again, but this time, they weren't tears of weakness or self-pity. They were tears of indignation, and a slow-burning anger began to rise from deep within me. I had given too much, sacrificed too much, stepped back too many times. I had allowed myself to become an option in their lives instead of an essential part. I sat there for a long time, until the faint light of a winter dawn began to seep through the window. The light fell on my tear-streaked face, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. The tiny seed that my dream of George had planted, now watered by a cruel truth, began to crack open. That sunrise was unlike any other. The light didn't bring the feeling of a fresh new start, but felt more like a harsh stage light, illuminating the raw, naked truth I had just uncovered. I hadn't slept a wink. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was strangely alert, as if a high fever had burned away all the fog, leaving only a painful clarity. I pushed myself up from the kitchen table and turned off the stove where the milk had long since burned. I didn't clean up the mess. I just left it. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to not be the one who tidied up the aftermath. I walked straight into the living room, where the morning light slanted through the windows, casting a silvery gray hue on everything. I no longer avoided the Christmas tree. I stood right in front of it, looking directly at the glittering ornaments, symbols of a family happiness that was now just an illusion. Kevin's lopsided star, George's glass orb, the sweater I knitted for Noah, they all seemed to look back at me, silent and waiting. Waiting for what? For me to break down? Or for me to be reborn? I turned and walked to George's desk. My hands were steady now. A strange, almost frightening calm had settled over me, the calm of someone who has reached the very bottom of loss and realized there's nothing left to lose. I opened the drawer and took out the Dream Fund passbook. I placed it on the oak desktop, my fingers tracing the words George had written. They chose their happiness, my inner voice said, clear and firm now, no longer a weak whisper. Now, it's my turn to choose mine. George would have wanted it that way. And it was true. George would never have wanted me to wither away, waiting for scraps of affection from others. He was the one who always encouraged me to live life to the fullest, to explore the world, to follow my own passions. This Dream Fund was proof of that. It wasn't created to sit in a drawer, collecting dust and sorrow. It was created to give wings to dreams. And if there was no one left to dream with me, then I would make them come true by myself. A fire had been lit. Not a fire of hatred, but one of self-affirmation. I turned on my old laptop, the fan whirring to life, breaking the morning silence. As the screen lit up, I typed words into the search bar. I never thought I'd type alone. Luxury solo travel for seniors. A cascade of results appeared, vibrant and enticing. White sandy beaches in Mexico, ancient cities in Europe, majestic rivers in Asia. I scrolled through them, and a strange sense of excitement began to bubble up, pushing aside the pain. This was a completely different world, a world of endless possibilities, a world that didn't depend on an invitation from anyone. My eyes landed on one particular tour, Christmas on the Danube. It was a 10-day river cruise through the dreamlike cities of Europe: Vienna, Budapest, Salzburg. The advertisement showed a luxurious ship gliding down a river sparkling with lights, the banks lined with glittering Christmas markets and snow-dusted cathedrals. It promised classical music concerts, gourmet dinners, and a chance to experience the authentic, festive spirit of the old world. My heart beat faster. That was it. It was the perfect contrast to the sunny, flashy Hawaiian vacation Kevin's family was on. My trip would be elegant, classic, and deep. This wouldn't be an escape. It would be a pilgrimage back to myself. I looked at the details. The trip departed in 5 days. The all-inclusive cost for a single cabin with a river view balcony was $15,000. It was a significant amount, but it was only a portion of the dream fund. I took a deep breath. I could do this. I had the right to do this. But then, a flicker of doubt. I had never traveled alone outside of the United States. How would I manage? Would it be safe? What would I tell my neighbors, my friends? The fear of the unknown, of being judged by others, started to pull me back. Just then, my gaze fell upon the photo of George on the desk. He was smiling, that radiant, encouraging smile. I could almost hear his voice in my head. "Go, Susan. What are you waiting for? This world is our book, and there are so many pages you haven't read yet." That was all I needed. I clicked the Book Now button. A form appeared, asking for my personal information, passport details, payment information. My hands flew across the keyboard, filling in each box with firm resolve. Name: Susan Peterson. Age: 66. Status: widow. Occupation: retired teacher. When I got to the payment section, I didn't hesitate for a second. I entered the information from the passbook, the $50,000 figure that I knew by heart. The moment my finger hovered over the Confirm Payment button, the world seemed to hold its breath. This was more than a financial transaction. It was a declaration, an act of liberation. I was buying back my freedom, my right to be happy, my own self-worth, without needing anyone's approval. I clicked. A green checkmark appeared with the words, "Congratulations, your trip is confirmed." A powerful wave of emotion washed over me. It was a mix of fear, exhilaration, and an incredible sense of relief. I did it. I actually did it. I leaned back in my chair, a trembling smile spreading across my lips, which then turned into a laugh. It started as a small chuckle, then grew louder, echoing through the quiet room. I laughed at my own foolishness for waiting so long. I laughed at the audacity of what I had just done. I laughed for the new chapter of my life that was about to begin. Tears streamed down my cheeks again, but this time they didn't taste of salty hurt. They had the sweet taste of freedom. I was no longer Susan Peterson, the mother left behind. The thrill of that bold decision carried me through the whole day, like a powerful shot of adrenaline that helped me push past the exhaustion and sorrow. I spent the rest of the morning getting my affairs in order. I called the bank to notify them of my international travel, making sure my credit card would work without a hitch. I double-checked my passport, thankfully. It was still valid. I even went online to check the weather in Vienna and Budapest in December to know what to pack. For the first time in days, my house wasn't silent. It was filled with the sound of my keyboard clicking, papers rustling, and my own soft whistling. But as night fell, and the initial rush subsided, a different feeling began to creep in. It was loneliness. Not the loneliness of being abandoned, but the loneliness of someone about to embark on a journey completely on her own. I pulled George's old, dusty suitcase down from the attic. When I opened it, a familiar scent of old paper and a hint of his aftershave wafted out, making my heart ache. I would pack this suitcase, but there would be no one beside me to help decide which sweater to bring or to remind me not to forget my portable charger. I would be walking through magnificent cities, but there would be no one to share my awe at an ancient piece of architecture or to share a cup of hot mulled wine with. A vague fear started to return. Was I being too impulsive? Was I just trying to fill a void in my heart with an extravagant but ultimately empty trip? I sat down on the floor next to the open suitcase, and the feeling of being adrift washed over me again. The next morning, I decided I needed to get out, to breathe some real-world air before I got completely lost in my travel plans. I had a few small things to buy: a universal power adapter, some personal medications, and maybe a new warm scarf. I drove to the town center, where the Christmas spirit was in full swing. Wreaths hung from the lampposts, familiar carols drifted out from the shops, and everyone seemed to be bustling about, happy and cheerful. I parked the car and started walking towards the main square. It was colder today, a sharp, crisp Minnesota winter cold. The wind blew in gusts, cutting through my thick coat and making me tuck my chin deeper into my scarf. As I passed the main entrance to the town market, something caught my eye and made me stop in my tracks. In a small corner, right next to the Salvation Army kettle, a group of volunteers had set up a makeshift stall. A handwritten cardboard sign read, "Street Jude's Community Charity, hot soup and warmth for Christmas." Behind a long table, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair was ladling thick, steaming soup into paper cups for a small, patient line of people who looked like they'd fallen on hard times, their clothes thin against the cold. But it wasn't the charity stall that truly stopped me. It was a small family huddled against a brick wall to shield themselves from the wind. The mother, her face worn with fatigue and worry, was trying to stretch her thin coat to cover her two small children, a little boy and a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The boy had his face buried in his mother's side, while the little girl just stood there quietly, her big round eyes watching the passers-by. And then I saw her hands. The little girl wasn't wearing any gloves. Her tiny hands, sticking out from sleeves that were too short, were chapped and red from the cold. Her delicate skin was almost purple. Every so often, she would lift her hands to her mouth, trying to breathe a little warmth into them. It was such an innocent, instinctive act, but it held a heartbreak that was just gut-wrenching. In that moment, the world around me seemed to stop. The Christmas music, the chatter of the crowd, it all faded away. All that was left was the image of that little girl's raw, red hands. And in a strange moment of clarity, the luxurious Danube River cruise, the sparkling Christmas markets in Vienna, the gourmet dinners, all of it suddenly seemed absurdly frivolous and extravagant. I was planning to spend $15,000 to run away from my own loneliness, while right here, in my own town, there were children who didn't even have a pair of gloves to keep them warm. What was mine and George's dream, really? To see the world, yes, but deeper than that, it was to experience life, to connect, to spread warmth. George was always that kind of person. He was the one who would pull over to help a stranger change a tire, the one who would slip a few dollars into the hand of a homeless person when he thought no one was looking. If he were here right now, what would he do? He wouldn't just walk by. He would stop. Another decision, even more powerful and decisive than booking the cruise, formed in my mind. It came naturally, with a certainty that felt like it was the only path I could possibly take. The trip to Europe can wait. These little hands can't. I didn't go into the market. I turned around and walked with purpose, not towards my car, but towards the charity stall. The man with the salt and pepper hair looked up as I approached, a tired but friendly smile on his face. "A cup of hot soup, ma'am?" he asked. I shook my head, my throat a little dry. I don't need soup, but I want to help." His smile widened a bit. "We can always use another pair of hands. You could help us serve, or—" "No," I interrupted, my voice firmer than I expected. "I want to help in a bigger way. I need to know, where is your organization located? Can I meet with the person in charge?" "I have a proposal." The man looked at me, a little surprised by my earnestness. He wiped his hands on his apron and pointed down the street. "Our main office is just around the corner, the old brick building with the green door. Our director, Mr. Samuel, is there now. Just tell him Bill from the soup stall sent you." "Thank you," I said, a strange sense of peace settling over me. "Thank you so much." I didn't look back at the little family. I didn't want to turn my actions into a spectacle of charity. I just knew that mine and George's dream fund was about to find a new purpose. The Street Jude's Community Charity building was tucked away on a quiet side street, nestled between an old laundromat and a shuttered grocery store. It had no grand facade. The paint was peeling on the brick, and the wooden sign with the organization's name was faded by the years. Yet, The green door, though old, had a welcoming and resilient look about it. I took a deep breath for courage, then pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior wasn't what I had imagined. It wasn't dreary or cluttered. On the contrary, the space was surprisingly bright and tidy, even though most of the furniture was old. Tall metal shelves lined the walls, stacked with neatly folded clothing, canned goods, and other necessities. A few volunteers, mostly older folks, were diligently sorting through donations, their conversation a low, warm hum. The faint smell of coffee mingled with the scent of soap and old paper. This place didn't radiate poverty, it radiated effort and compassion. A woman with her silver hair in a neat bun looked up from a box she was organizing and smiled at me. "Welcome. Can I help you with something?" "Hello," I replied, smiling back. "I'm here to see Mr. Samuel. Bill from the soup stall sent me." "Oh, Sam," she said, her smile widening. "He's in his office down the hall. Just go on in. The door's open." I thanked her and made my way down the hall. The office door was slightly ajar. I knocked lightly on the frame. A deep, somewhat tired voice called out from within, "Come on in." I pushed the door open. The room was small and simple, with just a metal desk, 2 chairs, and an old filing cabinet. The walls were covered with children's drawings and yellowed thank you cards. Sitting behind the desk was the man I'd seen at the soup stall, but now, without the apron, he was wearing a worn-out flannel shirt. He had short, salt and pepper hair and a weathered face, with lines of worry etched into it, but his eyes, when he looked up at me, were clear and shone with an unmistakable kindness. "Hello," he said, standing up politely. "I'm Samuel, but everyone just calls me Sam. Please, have a seat." "Thank you. I'm Susan Peterson." I introduced myself as I sat in the chair opposite him. "I was just talking to Bill outside." "Ah, yes," Sam nodded, sitting back down. "He said you had a proposal?" He looked at me with curiosity, but there was also a hint of weariness in his eyes, as if he were all too familiar with promises that led to disappointment. I decided not to beat around the bush. I put my purse down, took out the Dream Fund passbook, and placed it on the desk right between us. "Mr. Samuel," I began, my voice calm and steady. "This was my husband's and my life savings. My husband passed away 5 years ago. We had been saving this money for our retirement trips we'll now never be able to take together." Sam looked at the passbook, then back at me, listening silently, his expression softening with empathy. "The amount in here is $50,000, I continued, "and I want to use all of it to help your organization this Christmas." Silence filled the small office. Sam was stunned. He looked at me, then back at the passbook, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The weariness in his eyes was gone, replaced by utter astonishment. I went on, not wanting the silence to stretch. "This morning, I saw a little girl at your soup stall. She didn't have any gloves, and it hit me. Christmas isn't about running away to some faraway place to find happiness for yourself. Christmas is about bringing warmth to those who need it most. So, I want to use this money to fund a truly wonderful Christmas feast for all the families you help. I want every single child to have a new winter coat, a warm pair of gloves, and a gift they've actually wished for." By the time I finished speaking, I could see Sam's eyes had started to water. He quickly raised a hand to rub them, a slightly embarrassed gesture. He cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. "Mrs. Peterson, Susan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. In all my 20 years of doing this work, never has anyone." He trailed off, but I understood. He looked at me, his gaze deep and sincere. "Are you sure about this? This is you and your husband's life savings." I nodded, a small smile forming on my lips. "I've never been more sure of anything, Mr. Samuel. I believe this is the best way to honor my husband's dream. Our dream wasn't just about places on a map, it was about sharing joy. And I can't think of any greater joy than seeing a child warm and happy on Christmas Eve." Sam stood up, walked around the desk, and extended his hand to me. "Well then, Susan," he said, "welcome to the Street Jude's family." I stood and shook his hand. His grip was firm and warm. In that moment, a bond was formed, an understanding that needed no words. I was no longer a distant benefactor, and he was no longer a grateful recipient. We were partners on the same mission. And that's how my real journey of healing began. I canceled the Danube River cruise without a single regret. Instead, I made the St. Jude's Charity Center my second home. For the rest of that week, I was at the center from early morning until late at night. I did things I never thought I would do. I sorted through mountains of donated clothes with the other women, folding each shirt and pair of pants with care. I stood in the kitchen with Sam and the other volunteers, cooking enormous pots of soup, the smell of onions and carrots filling the entire building. I learned how to organize the food pantry shelves for maximum efficiency, but my favorite job was taking charge of Santa's wish list. Sam explained that they had a program where children from struggling families could write letters to Santa asking for one special gift. Usually, they could only fulfill a tiny fraction of those wishes with simple gifts like a book or a set of crayons. But this year, thanks to the Dream Fund, everything was different. I sat in Sam's small office, reading each handwritten letter, the scribbled handwriting, the innocent spelling mistakes they held entire worlds of hope. A little boy named Leo wished for a Lego space shuttle set. A girl named Maya wished for a pink bicycle. And then, I read a letter from a little girl named Sarah. "Dear Santa," she wrote, "I don't need any toys this year. I just wish my mom could have a really warm winter coat because hers has a rip in it." I cried when I read that letter. Tears of profound emotion and love. I realized I wasn't just giving away money. I was receiving so much more in return. I was getting back my faith in human kindness, the feeling of being useful, a sense of purpose. I spent days shopping, but this time, the joy was completely different. I hunted down the exact Lego space shuttle Leo wanted. I found the perfect pink bicycle with a flower basket for Maya, and I chose the warmest, most stylish coat I could find for Sarah's mom. Each gift was chosen with all my heart. Through it all, Sam and I grew closer. I learned that he was also a widower and had dedicated his life to this work after his wife passed away from a long illness. We shared stories about our late spouses, about our joys and sorrows. We found in each other the companionship of two souls who had known great loss but had refused to be broken by it. One evening, when it was just the two of us left at the center, wrapping the last of the gifts, Sam turned to me and said, "You know, Susan, you didn't just save Christmas for these families. You saved it for us too. We were running on fumes this year, our budget completely drained. I didn't know what we were going to do. And then you walked in, like some kind of miracle." I smiled. "Maybe we saved each other's Christmas, Sam." And it was the truth. I didn't feel lonely anymore. I was surrounded by new people, a new family bound not by blood, but by love and a shared desire to help. Christmas Eve arrived not with silence and solitude, as I had once feared, but in a flurry of bustling, joyful, and incredibly warm activity. From early in the morning, the St. Jude's Center was buzzing like a giant beehive. Volunteers, from teenagers to silver-haired seniors, all gathered together, each lending a hand to transform the everyday space into a true winter wonderland. The main hall, normally used for distributing food, was completely changed. A huge Christmas tree, donated by a local farm, stood in the center, sparkling with hundreds of colored lights and ornaments made by the neighborhood kids. Long tables were covered with crisp white cloths, set with small candles and sprigs of green pine. The air was filled with the scents of pine needles, roasting turkey from the kitchen, and the apple cinnamon pie a group of women were baking. It was no longer a charity center. It had become a cozy and elegant Christmas ballroom. I was there bright and early, wearing a deep red sweater I'd bought for the occasion and impulse buy while I was out shopping for the children's gifts. I didn't feel like a benefactor observing from a distance. I felt like a part of this engine of love. I worked alongside Sam and everyone else, arranging tables, setting out silverware, making sure everything was ready. Sam looked different today. He was clean-shaven, wearing a fresh shirt, and even a tie with little snowflakes on it. When he smiled at me, the lines around his eyes seemed to sparkle with joy. "What do you think, Susan?" he asked, his voice full of excitement. "Cleans up pretty nice, doesn't it?" "It's more than nice, Sam," I replied, looking around with deep satisfaction. It's perfect." And then, as evening fell and the lights were turned on, our guests began to arrive. One family at a time, they came through the green door, looking timid and a little overwhelmed. These were people to whom life had not been kind, their faces etched with worry and hardship. But as they stepped into the main hall and saw the beautiful, warm space waiting for them, the apprehension on their faces slowly melted away, replaced by wonder and undisguised joy. Little gasps of awe rippled through the room. The children, at first hiding behind their parents' legs, now had eyes wide with delight at the sight of the giant tree and the mountain of presents underneath it. The initial awkwardness quickly gave way to the sound of laughter and the happy chatter of children. Sam and I stood at the door, greeting each person. I didn't just say, "Welcome." I looked them in the eye, shook their hands, and said, "We are so happy you're here." I saw in their eyes not the gratitude of a recipient, but the emotion of people being treated with dignity and sincerity. But the moment that truly touched my heart was when I saw the little family I had met at the market. The mother walked in, holding her 2 children by the hand. She was still wearing that thin coat, but today her face was no longer gaunt with worry. It glowed with a glimmer of hope. And the little girl, the one with the raw, red hands, was now clinging to her mother, her big, round eyes wide with astonishment at everything around her. The feast began. A true Christmas dinner was served: golden brown roasted turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, fragrant roasted vegetables, and shimmering cranberry sauce. Everyone sat down together, enjoying the meal to the sound of soft Christmas music. I moved between the tables, refilling juice for the kids, chatting with the parents. I listened to their stories of hardship, their simple dreams, and the small joys in their lives. I was no longer Susan Peterson, the lonely widow. I was just Susan, a listener, a friend. After dinner, the moment all the children had been waiting for finally arrived. Sam, decked out in a fake beard and a red hat, made a perfect Santa Claus. He sat in a large armchair by the tree and began calling each child up to receive their gift. Cheers of excitement filled the room. Little Leo hugged his Lego space shuttle box, so happy he was literally jumping up and down. Maya let out a shriek of joy when she saw the pink bicycle, a gift so big it had to be kept in a separate corner. And then Sam called out the name Sarah. The little girl with the red hands shyly walked up. Sam handed her a large, silver-wrapped box. "This is for you, Sarah," he said in a booming Santa voice. "And Santa heard that your mommy was a very good girl this year too, so there's a gift for her as well." From the back, a volunteer brought out the warm coat I had chosen and gave it to Sarah's mother. The woman was speechless. She reached out with trembling hands to take the coat, and tears began to stream down her face. She didn't say a word, just pulled her little daughter into a tight hug, both of them crying with happiness. I stood in a corner of the room, quietly watching it all unfold. A feeling of warmth and completeness spread through me, a feeling no luxury cruise or glittering city could ever provide. I saw little Sarah, after composing herself, opening her gift. Inside wasn't a toy, but a pair of bright pink woolen gloves, a matching scarf, and a new pair of winter boots. She quickly pulled the gloves on. This time, her hands weren't red and raw. They were wrapped in warmth. She looked up, scanning the room as if searching for someone. Her eyes met mine, and then she smiled at me, a radiant, pure, and grateful smile. That was the moment it all came full circle. That was the most wonderful Christmas gift I had ever received. Just then, I saw a small group of people enter the center. It was a news crew from the local television station. A young female reporter approached Sam. I overheard her talking about a segment they were doing on Christmas miracles in the community and how the story of the party at Street Jude's had reached them. They wanted to interview Sam and ask about the mysterious benefactor who had funded it all. My heart beat a little faster. I didn't want the attention. I started to back away, planning to slip into the kitchen. But Sam, after exchanging a few words with the reporter, walked over to me. "Susan," he said quietly, "they want to talk to you. You don't have to show your face if you don't want to, but I think your story deserves to be heard. It could inspire so many people." I looked into Sam's eyes and saw trust and encouragement. I looked back out at the main hall, at all the smiling faces and joyous laughter. Maybe Sam was right. This wasn't just my story anymore. I nodded. All right, Sam, but I have one condition. The reporter, a bright young woman named Chloe, with intelligent eyes and a warm smile, agreed to my condition immediately. She seemed to understand that I wasn't seeking fame. What I wanted to share was a message, not my identity. They set up a discreet filming corner in Sam's office, where the lighting was cleverly arranged to show only my silhouette as I sat in a chair, with the frosted window looking out into the snowy night behind me. The camera would never capture my face, but the sensitive microphone would pick up every word I said. I sat down, my heart beating a little faster. Sam stood in the corner of the room, giving me a silent, encouraging nod. Chloe sat opposite me, just a few feet away, her expression full of respect. "Thank you for agreeing to this, ma'am," Chloe began, her voice gentle. "We just want to know, what moved you to make such a generous gesture?" I took a deep breath, the image of little Sarah's red hands flashing in my mind, and I began to tell my story, not the story of my family's betrayal, but the story of the Dream Fund. "My late husband and I started, my voice a little shaky at first but growing stronger. We always dreamed of traveling, of seeing the world when we retired. We had a savings account, a fund we called our Dream Fund. But life doesn't always go according to plan. Recently, I was planning to use that money for a solo trip, a trip to try and find some joy for myself." I paused, choosing my words carefully. But then I realized something. Sometimes we get so busy searching for happiness in faraway places that we forget that true happiness is right here, in connecting with the people around us. I realized that the greatest journey is sometimes the one that brings warmth to those right next to us, those who are struggling with the cold of winter and the cold of indifference. My voice grew more emotional, not with sadness, but with a fierce conviction. So I decided to change my travel plans. Instead of a luxury cruise ship, I chose this place. And I can tell you, this is the greatest Christmas gift I've ever given, and it's also the greatest gift I've ever received. To see a child smile when they get their first new coat, to see a mother's tears of joy, that's an experience no landmark in the world can compare to. This, right here, is the dream my husband would have been most proud of. The interview ended. I don't know how long I spoke. I just know that when I finished, a respectful silence hung in the room. Even the cameraman had lowered his camera. Chloe looked at me, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your story is truly beautiful." Scene change sound effect. A gentle whoosh, followed by the faint sound of ocean waves and light, tropical music. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Hawaiian resort, the atmosphere was completely different. Kevin was lounging by the pool, the soothing music and the sound of the waves creating a picture-perfect paradise. Jessica was taking selfies with a colorful cocktail, while the kids were splashing in the clear blue water. It was the perfect picture of a dream vacation, a picture built on a lie. Kevin was scrolling through his phone, looking at pictures his friends were posting of their snowy Christmas parties back in Minnesota, a vague sense of guilt gnawing at him. He knew he should call his mother, but Jessica had said, "Just let her have her peace, honey. Calling now will only make her sadder. We'll call later," and he had agreed. Just then, a notification from his banking app popped up on his screen, an alert he had set up for large transactions from his mother's account, just in case of an emergency. The bright red text was like an alarm bell. "Transaction from Susan Peterson's savings account, -$50,000. Recipient, Street Jude's Community Charity." Kevin shot up from his lounge chair, knocking over his lemonade. His heart dropped into his stomach. "No way," he muttered. "What's wrong, honey?" Jessica asked, walking over, still admiring the filter on her photo. $50,000, Kevin said, his voice cracking. Mom just transferred $50,000 to some charity. That's the entire dream fund she and Dad had. Jessica frowned. What? Is she out of her mind? Or did she get scammed? Panic seized Kevin. The worst-case scenarios flooded his mind. His mother, all alone at Christmas, had become prey for some scam artist. The guilt he felt now multiplied, mixing with fear. He had to call her. Right now. He dialed her number. It rang a few times before she picked up. It was his mother's voice. Mom, are you okay? Kevin practically yelled into the phone, forgoing any greeting. "The $50,000! That was your money. Yours and Dad's. What did you do? Did someone trick you? You can't just give away your entire life savings. Where are you?" On the other end of the line, Susan's voice was perfectly calm, not a hint of panic in it. In fact, it was steady and strong. "I'm fine, Kevin. I know exactly what I'm doing." "But..." Kevin tried to argue, but he could hear a buzz of happy noise and laughter in the background behind her. It wasn't the silence of an empty house. "I'm a little busy right now, son," Susan continued, her voice holding a distance he had never heard before. "I'll talk to you later. Merry Christmas to all of you." And then she hung up. Kevin stood there, stunned, the phone still pressed to his ear. His mother's calmness worried him more than panic would have. She didn't explain, didn't argue. She simply stated her actions and ended the call. He looked at Jessica, who looked just as bewildered. "She said she knows what she's doing," Kevin said, his voice full of confusion. "And she's somewhere with a lot of people." A sense of unease washed over them. Their lie seemed to have set off a chain of events they couldn't control. Their paradise vacation was suddenly darkened by a cloud of anxiety and guilt. They thought they were in control of the situation, but now they realized they didn't know their own mother at all. That short, strange phone call with his mother completely shattered the vacation atmosphere in Hawaii. Kevin couldn't relax on the lounge chair anymore. He paced back and forth by the pool, his mind in a turmoil. His mother's calmness was deeply unsettling. It wasn't the sound of resignation or sadness, it was the strength of someone who had found a new purpose, a purpose that no longer involved him. Jessica was no longer in the mood for pictures either. She sat on her chair, frowning at her phone, trying to look up St. Jude's Community Charity. "It seems like a legitimate organization, honey," she said after a few moments of searching. "It has a website, a real address right in our town, but $50,000? That's still insane." "It's not just about the money, Jessica," Kevin retorted, an edge of frustration in his voice. "Something's not right with Mom. She's home alone for Christmas, and then she gives away her entire life savings." Something must have happened. The guilt felt like a physical weight on his chest. He never should have listened to Jessica. He should have insisted on bringing his mother with them, or at the very least, staying with her. The air between them grew thick with tension. Their Christmas dinner at a fancy beachfront restaurant was tasteless. The laughter from other families around them only highlighted the heavy silence at their own table. They tried to act cheerful for the kids, but even Lily and Noah seemed to sense that something was wrong. "Did Grandma get our presents?" Lily asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her innocent question was like a knife to Kevin's heart. He and Jessica just looked at each other, with no idea how to answer. A few hours later, back in their hotel room, while their frustration and confusion were at a peak, Kevin's phone vibrated. It was a text from Mark, his best friend back in Minnesota. The message was just a link to a local news website and a single line of text. "Hey, the voice in this clip sounds really familiar. Is this your mom?" Kevin's heart leaped into his throat. He quickly tapped the link. An article popped up with a big, bold headline: "Mysterious benefactor uses life savings to save Christmas for hundreds of families at St. Jude's." "Jessica, come look at this," Kevin called to his wife, his voice trembling. They both huddled over the phone screen. The article told the story of a magical Christmas party at the St. Jude's Charity Center, funded by an anonymous widow who had used her and her husband's entire dream fund to bring joy to the less fortunate. And then they played the embedded video clip. The footage started with heartwarming scenes from the center, children laughing, families enjoying a feast. Then the camera cut to an interview with a woman sitting with her back to them. The lighting only highlighted her familiar figure and her silver hair. And then her voice came through the phone's speaker, warm and full of emotion. "The greatest journey is sometimes the one that brings warmth to those right next to us." Kevin and Jessica were frozen. It was unmistakable. It was Susan's voice. Every word she spoke, every mention of the Dream Fund, of the meaning of giving, was like a hammer blow to their conscience. They had lied to her about being tight on finances so they could enjoy this lavish vacation. Meanwhile, his mother, whom they had pictured as lonely and heartbroken, was performing an act of grace and selflessness that was beyond their comprehension. The contrast was so bitter and humiliating they could hardly breathe. The image they had created of a lonely, vulnerable old woman had completely crumbled. In its place was the image of a strong, independent woman who had transformed her own pain into a force for helping others. Jessica sank onto the bed, her face in her hands. "Oh, no," she whispered. Her face was pale with shame. She had looked down on her mother-in-law, had seen her as a nuisance, but that woman had a heart bigger than she could ever imagine. Kevin felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. It wasn't just guilt, it was embarrassment. He was ashamed of his own selfishness, ashamed for not understanding his mother, ashamed for letting his wife treat her that way. He had been a terrible son. Without another word, he grabbed the phone and dialed his mother's number again. He didn't care about the money anymore. He just wanted to hear her voice, to apologize, to try and fix the horrible mistake he had made. The phone rang, and this time, Susan answered. "Mom," Kevin choked out, his voice breaking, no longer with anger, but with overwhelming regret. "I saw the news. I'm so sorry. I'm such a jerk. We lied to you. While we were here, enjoying this, you were doing that. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." He couldn't form complete sentences anymore, just choked sobs. Jessica, seeing him, quickly took the phone from his hand, her own eyes filled with tears. "Susan," she cried, "I'm so sorry. I was so selfish. I have no excuse for what I did. I am truly, truly sorry." On the other end of the line, there was a pause. Susan didn't yell, didn't scold them. She just quietly listened to their confession and their tears. To Kevin and Jessica, that silence was heavier than any criticism. Finally, Susan's voice came through, still calm, but not distant anymore. There was a weariness in it, but also a sense of peace. "I heard you," she said softly. "Now is not the time to talk about this. You two need to take care of the children. We'll talk when you get back." She hung up again, leaving Kevin and Jessica in a hollow, shameful silence. Their dream vacation was over. Their Hawaiian paradise now felt like a prison of their own guilt. They had gotten what they wanted, a Christmas without Susan, but the price was their own self-respect and a deep wound in their relationship with the woman who had given them nothing but unconditional love. They knew that when they returned, they would have to face not just their mother, but their own consciences, and the road to healing would be a very long one. A year went by. Winter returned to Minnesota, bringing with it the cold winds and a pristine blanket of white snow. But this year, the atmosphere in my little house was completely different. There was no more lonely silence, no more sorrowful nostalgia. Instead, it was filled with a warmth, a bustle, and the sound of laughter. My relationship with Kevin's family had changed profoundly after that fateful Christmas. Their flight back from Hawaii had been a long and quiet one. When they arrived at my house, not with flashy souvenirs but with faces etched with remorse, I didn't scold them. I simply put the kettle on, and we sat down at the kitchen table, where it all began, for the most honest and sincere conversation we had ever had. There were no accusations, just the truth. Jessica, through her tears, admitted her selfishness and insecurity, confessing that she had felt overshadowed by my memories of George. Kevin admitted his own weakness in not standing up for my feelings, and I, in turn, admitted my own part. I had been so lost in the past that I had unintentionally put an invisible pressure on their lives. We cried together, we shared together, and we forgave each other. It was a painful but necessary process of healing. And now, a year later, the fruits of that healing were right here in my living room. The house was full of people. Kevin and Jessica were in the kitchen, helping me with dinner. But this time, it wasn't a strained offer of help. It was a joyful collaboration. Kevin, who rarely set foot in the kitchen before, was now making mashed potatoes from scratch using my recipe, teasing his wife relentlessly. Jessica was carefully setting the table. She had even brought a new set of Christmas dishes to surprise me. Lily and Noah were gathered around a special guest. Samuel, or Sam as I now called him, was sitting in George's armchair, but he didn't seem small in it. On the contrary, his calm, warm presence seemed to bring new life to the old chair. He was telling the kids funny stories about his work at the charity center, and their giggles echoed through the room. My relationship with Sam had slowly blossomed over the past year. We started with coffee dates and walks in the park. We discovered a shared love for books, for gardening, and most importantly, a deep understanding of the pain of loss and the joy of giving. He had become my companion, my confidant. He didn't replace George, no one ever could, but he filled the empty space in my present with his kindness and a quiet, steady love. When dinner was ready, we all gathered around the table. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, still decorated with the old, meaningful ornaments, but this year it looked brighter, more alive. Before we started eating, Kevin stood up, holding a glass of sparkling cider. He looked around the table, his eyes finally resting on me, full of love and respect. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice clear and emotional. "Last year we made a huge mistake. We lost sight of what's truly important, but one person didn't. Mom. Mom taught us an invaluable lesson about forgiveness, about love, and about the true meaning of Christmas. She turned a savings account into a legacy. So I'd like to raise my glass to my mom, the strongest, most generous woman I know." Everyone raised their glasses. "To Susan," Sam said, smiling at me. "To Mom," Jessica said, her eyes sincere. Tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. But the surprises weren't over. After the toast, Kevin and Jessica looked at each other, then handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Just open it, Mom," Jessica said softly. I opened the envelope. Inside were official documents for a trust fund. They had established a new fund in the name of the George and Susan Peterson Dream Fund, with an initial contribution of $10,000 from them. The purpose of the fund was to sponsor a special project for the St. Jude's Center every year at Christmas. "We want Mom and Dad's legacy to continue," Kevin explained, taking my hand. "This is going to be our new family Christmas tradition. Every year we'll all volunteer together and decide together who the fund will help." I was speechless. I just hugged my children, my heart overflowing with something even bigger than happiness. It was pride. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house had settled back into its familiar quiet, Sam and I cleaned up together. We worked in a comfortable, easy silence. When everything was tidy, we stood by the living room window, looking out at the gently falling snow. On the fireplace mantel, next to the photo of George, there was now a new framed picture, a photo of Sam and me, surrounded by happy children at the charity center last Christmas. The two pictures, one of the past and one of the present, didn't clash. They complemented each other, telling the complete story of my life. That year, I didn't go to Hawaii, and I didn't go to Paris. I thought to myself, my inner voice no longer narrating a story but reflecting deeply. But I took the trip of a lifetime. I turned George's dream fund into his legacy, a legacy of love. I learned that happiness isn't about waiting for an invitation, but about realizing where your heart truly belongs. And sometimes, the warmest home is the one you build for others. Sam gently took my hand. I squeezed his, feeling its steady warmth. I hadn't just found my family again. I had found a new family. I had found love, and most importantly, I had found myself. This Christmas, I wasn't just celebrating a holiday. I was celebrating life. This Christmas Eve has drawn to a close. My house, after a long, bustling day, has now returned to its familiar quiet. But it's a completely different kind of quiet. It's no longer the empty silence of loneliness, but a deep, settled peace, like a lake after a rainstorm, clear and reflecting the sky. The fire in the hearth has died down to glowing embers, giving off one last gentle wave of warmth. The scent of pine from the Christmas tree mingles with the lingering aroma of pumpkin pie, creating a fragrance of contentment. I'm sitting here in George's armchair, holding a cup of chamomile tea that has gone a bit cool. I'm not drinking it, just feeling the warmth from the mug seep into my palms. My gaze is fixed on the mantelpiece, where I've placed two photographs side by side. One is of George, his radiant smile still so alive after all these years, a symbol of my past, the foundation of everything I have. The other is the picture of Sam and me at St. Jude's last Christmas, surrounded by the children, both of our faces lit up with a deep and genuine joy. The past and the present, sitting together, not in conflict, but in harmony, like two connecting chapters of the same book. Life is a miraculous thing. It has its own unique ways of teaching us the most important lessons. I used to think happiness was a destination, a state of perfect contentment you reached when everything was just right, a family gathered together, a life of ease. But this past year has taught me that happiness isn't a noun, it's a verb. It's the act of choosing every single day. It's choosing to forgive instead of resent, choosing to act instead of wait, choosing to open your heart instead of building walls around it. I've learned that a true home isn't built with bricks and mortar, but with the bonds of love. This physical house of mine in Minnesota, though filled with memories, had at one point become a prison of loneliness. But when I stepped into the street, Jude's Center, an old place lacking in material things, I felt more at home than ever. Because there was sharing there was empathy, there was humanity. I've learned that the most precious legacy we leave behind isn't money or property, but the mark we leave on the hearts of others. George's dream fund, when it sat in the bank, was just a number. But when it was transformed into warm coats, hot meals, and gifts for children, it became a living legacy, a flame that was lit and will continue to spread. And perhaps the most important lesson I learned was about the power of forgiveness. Not an easy, superficial forgiveness, but one that comes from understanding. To have the perfect Christmas we had today, we all had to walk through a valley of truth and confrontation together. The memory of our first meeting after their Hawaii trip is still so clear in my mind, as if it were only yesterday. I still remember our conversation on the day they returned after leaving me alone for Christmas. It was 5 days after Christmas when they came back. I knew their exact flight time, not because they told me, but because I had looked it up online myself. I didn't go to the airport. I knew this meeting had to happen here, in this house where the wound was first made. I saw their taxi pull up from the living room window. The snow was coming down thick, covering everything in a blanket of white. The car stopped, and 3 figures emerged: Kevin, Jessica, and the 2 children. Even from a distance, I could see the difference. The glamorous, confident air from the Hawaii pictures was gone. In its place was a heavy weariness. Their tans looked out of place against the stark white Minnesota winter. The door opened, and they stepped inside. Kevin came in first, carrying 2 suitcases. He couldn't look me in the eye. He just muttered, "Hi, Mom," and then quickly ushered the children upstairs to put their things away as a way to escape. Jessica remained at the threshold, her face drawn, her makeup unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She just stood there, clutching her purse, silent. Her silence was heavier than 1,000 apologies. I didn't say anything. I simply went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Normal, familiar actions are sometimes the best life rafts in an emotional storm. I heard Kevin's footsteps coming back down. He walked into the kitchen, as timid as a boy who's been caught doing wrong. "Mom," he began, his voice hoarse. "Sit down, Kevin," I said softly, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. "Have a cup of tea." He obediently sat, his hands clasped on the table, a childhood habit whenever he was nervous. I placed a hot cup of tea in front of him. The steam fogged up his glasses for a moment. "I don't know where to start," he whispered, looking down at the tea instead of at me. "There are no excuses for what I did. I was a terrible son, a weak husband, and I let my selfishness blind me. I hurt you, and I'll never be able to forgive myself for that." Tears began to stream down his cheeks, landing on the wooden table. I looked at my son, a 40-year-old man crying like a child, and my heart melted. The anger had long since faded, leaving only a mother's love. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Kevin," I said, my own voice a little choked up, "look at me." He slowly raised his head, his red-rimmed eyes full of pain. "You made a mistake. A big one," I said frankly. "You disappointed me, but you are not a terrible son. A terrible person wouldn't be sitting here crying with remorse. A terrible person would find a way to blame someone else." I squeezed his hand. "I don't need you to beat yourself up forever. I need you to learn from this. You are a good man, Kevin. You have a kind heart. But sometimes, your desire to please everyone makes you forget to do what's right. In life, there will be times you have to choose, and you have to be strong enough to choose what's right, even when it's hard, even when it might upset someone. I looked deep into his eyes. You love Jessica, I know that. And I love her too. But a strong marriage is built on mutual respect, and that includes respecting each other's families. You need to be her partner, but you also need to be my son. Those two roles don't have to conflict unless you let them. You have to learn to find a balance, to communicate, and to set healthy boundaries. He nodded vigorously, tears still flowing. I understand, Mom. I promise I'll change. I will never let this happen again. I believe you, I said, and it was the truth. Now dry your eyes. Go on up and check on the kids. I need to talk to Jessica alone. He looked at me, a flicker of worry in his eyes. You're not going to. No, I reassured him. I'm not going to be hard on her, but we need to talk, as two women. He nodded, stood up, and hugged me tightly, a hug that seemed to want to make up for all the days of distance. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I love you too, I replied, patting his back. Once Kevin was upstairs, Jessica slowly entered the kitchen. She looked so small and fragile under the kitchen's warm light. She didn't sit in the chair Kevin had just left, but stood at the doorway, as if she didn't dare venture further into my space. Susan, she began, her voice barely a whisper. Come in, Jessica, I said, my tone still gentle. Would you like some tea? She shook her head. I don't deserve your kindness. I sighed, got up, and walked over to her myself. I took her cold hand and gently led her to the table. Sit down, dear. We can't talk if you just stand there. She sat, her eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table. I sat across from her. The silence stretched for a few minutes. I gave her the space to begin on her own. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked up at me. Her eyes were swollen and red, but they no longer held defiance or distance. They held a heartbreaking sincerity. I went there, she said softly. Went where? I asked, surprised. To the Street Jude's center, she replied. Yesterday, after we landed, I told Kevin to take the kids home first. I took a cab and went straight there. I was completely taken aback by this confession. I thought she would avoid it, would not want to face it. Why, Jessica? I asked, my curiosity overriding all other emotions. I had to understand, she said, her voice beginning to tremble. I had to see it for myself. When we watched that video in Hawaii, I just couldn't get it. How? How could someone who was treated so badly by her own family do something so noble? I thought, maybe it was just for show, a way to shame us. That's how selfish I was. She gave a bitter laugh. I went there with a heart full of skepticism. It was freezing cold. I was only wearing a light jacket, still used to the Hawaiian weather. I stood across the street, just watching. The center was closed, but a few volunteers were still inside cleaning up. I saw Mr. Samuel, the man from the pictures, helping an old homeless man find a warmer pair of shoes. I saw another woman carefully restocking shelves with cans of soup. She paused, swallowing hard. There were no news cameras, no audience, just ordinary people doing extraordinary things, quietly. They weren't doing it for applause. They were doing it because it needed to be done. And I stood there, in my designer boots, shivering from the cold. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly poor. Not poor in money, but poor in spirit, in empathy. I saw how shallow I was, she continued, fresh tears starting to fall. My whole life, I've measured the value of everything in money, in what other people could see. I wanted a vacation in Hawaii so I could post beautiful pictures, so my friends would be envious. I didn't want you to come, not because of the money, but because, I'm ashamed to admit this, because I was jealous. I frowned. Jealous? You were jealous of an old woman like me? I was jealous of your memories, she said, her voice full of bitterness. I was jealous of the love you and George had. This house, every object, every story you tell, it all revolves around him. I felt like an outsider, a supporting character in your great love story. I could never live up to the ghost of the past. So I tried to create my own new memories, flashy, expensive ones, to prove that my life with Kevin was valuable too, and I thought your presence would overshadow all of that. I was so foolish and petty. At last, I understood. Her distance, Her coldness, it didn't come entirely from selfishness, but from a deep-seated insecurity. She wasn't trying to push me away. She was trying to claim her own place. I let out a long breath, a breath that carried away years of hurt and misunderstanding. I got up, went over to Jessica, and wrapped my arms around her trembling shoulders. She stiffened at first, surprised, but then she buried her head in my shoulder and sobbed, letting out all the tears she had held back for so long. "Oh, Jessica," I whispered, patting her back gently, "why did you never tell me any of this?" "I couldn't," she said through her sobs. To say it out loud would be to admit how weak I felt. I let her cry for a while. When her sobs quieted, I gently helped her sit up straight and handed her a tissue. "Jessica, listen to me," I said, looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. "No one is asking you to compete with a memory. My love for George is a part of my life, a part that shaped who I am today, but it belongs to the past. Your love with Kevin is the present and the future. You are not a supporting character in my story. You are the leading lady in your own, and you are a vital part of the new chapter in my life." I took her hands in mine. A family isn't a competition to see who is loved more. A family is a circle, where everyone has their own irreplaceable place. That circle grows, welcoming new members. You didn't just step into my and George's story. You and Kevin started a whole new story, and that story expanded our family circle. You gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren. You brought new life into this house. You don't need to prove your worth with expensive vacations. Your worth is in who you are, in the love you have for your husband and your children. And as for forgiveness, I continued, I have already forgiven you. Not because I'm a saint, but because I understand. I was a young daughter-in-law once, too. I had my own insecurities, my own silly comparisons. We're all human, and we all make mistakes. What's important isn't that we never fall, but that we get back up, admit our faults, and try to do better. I smiled at her, a genuine smile. And you have done that. You went to St. Jude's on your own. You dared to face the truth. That took a lot of courage. I'm proud of you, Jessica. For the first time, I saw a real, though hesitant, smile on Jessica's face. Another tear rolled down her cheek, but this time, I knew it was a tear of relief. And that is how the bridge between us was rebuilt, not with bricks of tolerance, but with bricks of understanding and respect. Our mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship had turned a new page. This Christmas, as Jessica was helping me set the table, she paused and said quietly, "You know, Mom, I brought these dishes not to surprise you, but because I wanted to contribute a little something of my own to the traditions of this house." I smiled and replied, "They're beautiful, Jessica, and from now on, they will be a part of our Christmas memories." As we stood together in the kitchen, shoulder to shoulder, preparing dinner, I felt a real harmony. No more awkward silences, no more polite formalities, just laughter, idle chat, and the comfortable ease of 2 women who love the same family. Tonight, sitting here alone in the quiet, I look again at the 2 photos on the mantel, George and my cherished past, Sam and my peaceful present. And I realize there's another, invisible photo there too. It's the picture of a family that broke and then healed, stronger and closer than before. It's the picture of 2 women, a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, who found their way to each other's hearts. And that, perhaps, is the greatest Christmas miracle of all. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you are connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going. And may you and your family have a blessed and peaceful Christmas.